Hey there, I'm Rachel Ehring, and you're listening to the Top Music Piano Podcast. Get inspired as we discuss creative resources, trends in piano pedagogy, ways to grow your income and streamline your studio, and new ways to engage your students each week. If you are a teacher who wants to go beyond the method books to create an innovative studio that fosters lifelong music makers, you've come to the right place. Hey, piano teachers, welcome to the show. You are going to love today's episode. My guest, Amie Webster, is not only super creative when it comes to teaching ideas, but she's also one of the sweetest people. I had so much fun talking with her about improvisation and ideas about how to add more improvisation to your teaching. If you have never done improvisation with your students, or if you are a seasoned teacher, I think you will get a lot out of this episode. We get into using improvisation for different levels of students, how she incorporates improv into online lessons, and at the end, I even ask her about using Legos in piano lessons, so be sure to stay for the whole episode. Here's a little about Amie. Amie is an enthusiastic piano teacher of 28 years, mom of 3 busy boys, and started Motif Music Studios, a multi-teacher music studio, alongside her husband, Jeff Webster, in 2010. Motif Music Studios is now a collaborative music school with a team of creative, heart-led teachers who are focused on nurturing students in their musical growth and seeing students thrive as their individual strengths are celebrated. As a YouTube creator, Amie also enjoys introducing creative teaching ideas and highlights piano music by contemporary composers. This pursuit has been a fun-filled, life-giving creative pursuit, and she hopes it encourages other teachers in their individual teaching journeys as well. Amie is fueled by passion, caffeine, and curiosity, and is so thankful for the ways music has been woven into her life in so many beautiful ways. Here's my chat with Amie. Hi, Amie. Welcome to the show. I'm so excited to get to know you a little today and hear some of your thoughts on improvisation with your students. First of all, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your teaching studio?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me here today, Rachel. So my name is Amie Webster, and I'm from Vancouver Island, Canada. And I am owner with my husband of Motif Music Studios, which has been a multi-teacher studio since 2010. And the 13 years previous to that, I was a solopreneur piano teacher and have just loved that this career suits me wonderfully and has brought lots of joy over the years.
You've been doing this a long time, haven't you, Amie?
I have. Yeah, I had early on teachers that said, Amie, you should teach. And I was like, so here we are, right? I started young. Yeah.
Well, you obviously are a very creative teacher from everything I've seen online about you. And so I knew that you would be the perfect person to come on and talk about teaching improvisation and creativity in the lessons, because I know you do a lot of that. So first of all, why do you think it's important to include improvisation in piano lessons?
What a great way to start off. And it feels like I was the unlikely teacher to be like teaching with so much creativity in some ways, because I started as that typical by the book sort of teacher. But as I've grown in my teaching, I just want so badly to create musicians from the very start. And I feel like building with improvisation in lessons creates listeners at the instrument, and it creates a really fresh sort of flexibility for learners too, when they actually feel like some sense of ownership about the sounds that they're creating at the piano. So I think seeing that spark from students is what's really motivated me to keep digging in to like, how can we explore music together? And I've been inspired by so many other educators too. So it was an unlikely detour for me in many ways, but I think that will resonate with some listeners too, who are like, I don't know how to get off the book and I don't know how to nurture creativity from the start.
Yeah, and I think I'm kind of in that boat, or I mean, it's been a journey for me as well, because I was taught very traditionally. I was scared of improvisation. I'm still a little scared of improvisation, to be honest. So I totally hear you on that. I would love to know a little more about your early days of teaching and how you decided to kind of take this little, I don't remember what you called it, uncommon detour or whatever you called it, this little detour of more creative teaching.
Well, interestingly, although I've always had like this creative, energetic approach to teaching, so I will give myself that, that I've had that energy in teaching. Interestingly, starting to teach online 5 years ago, when many of us launched online, actually motivated my creativity because I thought I really need to find ways of communicating music making in new ways. And I actually found like being able to demonstrate things not just from a side to side angle, but from an above the keys angle also gave me new eagle eye abilities to encourage that kind of creativity. So I think actually starting to teach online really gave me a ton of inertia when it came to getting off the page a bit more. And you'd think it would be the opposite, but for me, that was a real big encouragement.
Okay, interesting. We're going to get into that a little bit more later, but I want to kind of go back to the beginning and ask, how do you introduce improvisation in those very early lessons, maybe even from the first lesson you have with a student?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I think from the very start, I've started to like enjoy creating sound. So, and getting students to like be like, I just created music, like that excitement, right? So, like many of us do, I'll have the student put the pedal down if they can like tiptoe down there and wiggle forward on the bench if they're small. And then we play around with the black keys, and I say about it's a scale family. So we're in this key where everyone kind of belongs to the sounds that create. And then we can try to go outside of that too. Like, it sounds great. You put the pedal down and everything's going to sound wonderful on the black keys. But then we try to take detours too. Like, what happens if we throw a different sound in there? And what detour can we take on the white notes? I also, from the very beginning, I love the blues, doing that E-flat blues. And I know if someone's new to it, Chrissy Ricker has a great handout for creating blues sounds at the keyboard right from the start. I also try to capture like something a student's telling me about. So they might be like, I lost my first tooth. And I'll say, oh, okay. Do you want to write a song about it? And then we might do like a back and forth story where we're like, okay, I lost my tooth because I, tripped on the pavement. And so you could hear like all of a sudden they're like, their eyes open like, oh my goodness, I tripped. And you make it sound like you tripped on the pavement. And I know you have a great handout for sound stories. And that's something teachers listening in might also go, okay, a sound story where they create a sound effect for a story. And so I've also started reading just general music kind of stories in lessons for a young beginner. And those are great ways to launch into creating sound at the keyboard. And of course, that's not just for the young beginner. And I think we'll get into that a bit too. What happens if we have an older student in front of us who didn't just lose their tooth by tripping on the pavement?
Yeah. Yeah. Those are great suggestions. Yeah, I like doing the blues one too. I don't know if it's the Chrissy Ricker one, but when I discovered that kids can play black notes and an A, and it sounds bluesy, and they think it's the greatest thing. And if it's a real beginner, I'll even put like a little marker on the A's and I'll say play black notes and then any of these white notes. Those are the only white notes you can play, and it sounds amazing. And they're like, oh, I'm playing the blues.
It is. We actually did it as a recital engagement thing for our last recital. I played the blues at the piano, and parents lined up and took turns playing along. And the students were so excited to see the audience participate. And the parents were like nervous, but you should have seen the smiles. So I just kept the blues going, and parents could come and I had a picture of it on the keys, like these are the black keys, and just had like smiley face stickers on them. And they just went for it. And so that was a good way to use that activity, but then for a group or taking turns, things like that. So Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, that's a great group activity. What a fun recital. Oh my goodness. I wish I could come to your recitals. That sounds amazing. So for me, I find that it's actually easier for me to introduce improvisation to the very beginners. One of my favorites is Tim Topham's beginning improv power pack, I think it is. And it's just the students play any black note and there's a little accompaniment, or any white note and there's, for me, that's easy. I think when it gets beyond that is where I struggle a little bit. So can you give us some ideas of how to build on that? Maybe students who are a little bit beyond just playing black notes or just playing white notes. What do you do next?
Yeah, that is such a fabulous question. And it does take that extra dose of courage, right? When you've had these students that are like playing off notes and then suddenly you're like, oh, I want to like build more creativity. How do I do that? So a few things for teachers, if they're not as familiar with that, then a resource like Forrest Kinney's that's like pattern play. It gives you modes to use and actual accompaniment for the teacher. And then the student, all of a sudden, you kind of break into this aspect that the scales and the triads and chords and arpeggios that they learned are actually building blocks for improvising. And I love to have that be a tie to being this practical toolbox for students so they feel like they actually already have the tools. And now we're figuring out how to make that really special. So that would be one, is using scales and chords with a resource like that. The next thing I do fairly often with the older ones is create a chord progression of their own. So for instance, if they have a favorite artist, like they're listening to Taylor Swift or they're listening to another popular artist, or they've just come home from the musical Wicked, then I might say like, oh, well, let's actually see what chords are used and let's create like a 4-chord pattern of your own. So then we might write out the scale, like, C major. And I often do it in the number system, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then we just try one chord and then try like the C major chord. And then we go, oh, well, what does it sound like if we do C major to E minor? And then they're like, oh, well, I kind of like that, but let's try C to A minor. Ooh, that's kind of interesting. And so then we actually pick their signature progression. And it's really cool how at first they're like, oh my goodness, like I just wrote a song. And they're so excited. And so sometimes we just leave that as a standalone fun thing that we do. Other times, if they get really into it, that's the basis of the harmony, and we might create a melody on top of that separately. So that's one thing that's usually quite popular. The other thing I do lots of is a popular theme or a melody, something like Ode to Joy or similar. And then figuring out what chords would go under that, or even like sometimes playing a simple melody and then trying like every note with it. Like for Twinkle Twinkle, my like linear training would have me like, oh, well, it for sure goes with C major, F major, and G. Like, oh, we got to stick to the rules. But sometimes I'll get them to do a bass line that's like, and they're suddenly just going downwards with the scale. And they're like, oh, okay, we can actually just experiment. And that's the real basis of improvising. Is it's not wrong. It might be interesting. It might be something that you're like, oh, wow, that really, my ear doesn't like that. But first we have to experiment. And that was hard for me because I see music in chords and traditional harmony. Absolutely. So I see a melody and I can definitely just choose the right chords for the setting, which would be helpful if you had a singer that had to stay on tune. But so those are some ways that I create that with students. I also do rhythmic exploration with those kind of students that are also playing. So for instance, we might figure out a tango pattern with a piece that they're already playing, something that's already in their ears, and think, okay, we could like dun da dum bum bum ba dum bum. And then all of a sudden you just have a different rhythmic idea that creates a new flavor. And so that's kind of like in the zone of reimagining pieces that are already in their fingers, and they just get to take a musical detour with it. So those are a few to start.
Yeah, I'm curious. Do you find it's a little hard for students sometimes to switch? Because there's so much of the lesson that it's like, this is the way it has to be. This is a quarter note. It's one count. This is a G above middle C. And then all of a sudden, we're going to this place of there's no wrong notes. You can do whatever you want. How do you kind of switch gears there?
Yeah. We all tremble in fear, right? Especially if you have like exam board students and things like that, or adjudicated lessons. So that is a whole different thing about going, okay, what does it look like in real life music making, and how can we keep those separate? But in some ways, I don't know, my ideas are changing on that too, because I start to realize some of those famous historical composers were actually brilliant improvisers. So we're trying to like follow their score to each note. But in doing so, I know so many, and you probably would have observed this or felt this, that one stray note has us sidelined. Like, oh my goodness, the wheels are coming off this wagon, I'm performing, and I have no tools for how do I keep it musical and keep going when things are going wrong. So I think sometimes it is a better bridge than we realize. So for instance, for students right away, I've been teaching a bit from Piano Safari and their rote pieces. And right away I say, well, we're aiming to play this how the composer intended it. But this time when you play it through, if something goes sideways, I want you to create a fake ending. So here they are playing Hungry Herbie Hippo or something like that. And all of a sudden they have a stray note that appears. And their job is to keep it happening in that kind of tonality and key, and then see if they can find their way home, or if not, make up their way home. And so in some ways, I keep them some separate. And in some ways, I'm actually starting to say, hey, these are real musicianship skills. We're actually learning how to think in the moment and how to create music and be able to do those more in parallel ways.
I like that. Yeah, that's a really good perspective and a good way to look at it. And I find sometimes if we're doing a lot of like note reading, rhythms, all of that stuff, it's kind of like a breath of fresh air to do some of this more creative improvisation stuff. And you can almost see this switch in the student, like, whew, okay, it's like I was doing math and now I get to do art or something, it's just like, it can be a really nice little creative break for them too, I think.
You are right, though, in the case that for some, it can be intimidating to improvise. And I think that's at the root of that question, too, is thinking, well, for some, it's like really playful and, hey, we're doing these creative things. And for others, it's like, well, you've spent all this time showing me what to play and how to count. And now you just want me to go like totally off script. In that case, I do sometimes chat about and have talked about this with some other composers, is creating some framework and creating some barriers actually can increase creativity. So sometimes if you say to someone, hey, make up a song, look at, you've got 88 keys, what do you come up with? Some students will be in heaven. They'll be like, oh my goodness, and they just go wild. But for most students, and myself included as a student, I would have gone, I have no idea what two notes my ears might like. Like that just felt overwhelming. So I think the other thing for me is creating some barriers at first, and some context actually can expand creativity. And so, for instance, going, okay, this is a scale family. Let's use the Dorian mode from D to D with no sharps and flats. Let's see if it sounds Celtic if we play it in 6/8 time. And so then you have students like, okay. And you go, oh, okay, well, now we've got this lilting melody. Let's try it with open fifths. Dum, da, dum, ba, dum, ba. and you've got these playful ideas. So you've created a context for it. And I sometimes include the students in brainstorming that sort of structure, but other times they might want me to. Well, just tell me, okay, well, let's have it sound like a sunset and let's have it in the key of G flat major, for instance. So then that gives them some structure.
Yeah, there was so much wisdom in what you just said. I think that's really, really good. And I was just thinking about some of my students who, I don't know if it's out of fear or what, but they'll kind of they might play one or two notes and just kind of get attached to that, or they'll just kind of attach themselves to something and they won't want to get out of that, those two notes that they found that they like. Do you have any advice for kind of expanding that improvisation a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great idea. I think for one, I try not to worry so much anymore if someone does really kind of ruminate in one area for longer. And I found as a really fast-paced, forward-moving teacher, I have to hold myself back sometimes and go oh, they're really enjoying this. I'm actually gonna just relax. And the exploration is fabulous. But sometimes to help them out of a stuck place, or especially if they're oh, I want to do something more, but I just don't know. That's when I might go and use some composition principles. So I might say, okay, what happens if we use this, 5-note little idea that you have? What happens if we move it up or down by sequence? So then we would talk about adding sequence as a neat compositional technique. And then we might say, okay, let's use this same one. Let's add it in retrograde and write it backwards. So we'll keep the rhythm the same, the notes the same, but the last note is now going to be the beginning note, and we'll try that. And so then as we try some of these little compositional techniques like inversion, retrograde, repetition, they're already good at that usually, then that also creates a structure that promotes expanding the ideas. So that's sometimes what I would do if we're okay, I think this has potential, but it might not have to have potential. And that's something that I used to do, is I'd always try to turn it into a composition and notate it. And now I'm no, it's really valid to start a portfolio of ideas too. And then students get their drafts and then they go, actually, this is one I want to invest in some more, and not be scared of commitment, because sometimes they have an idea and then it just doesn't pan out, and that's actually okay too. And that's just a sketch in the desk, right? And so it's also really valid to have lots of works in progress, so to speak.
Yeah, I did want to ask you about notation, and what do you do with these ideas that they come up with? Do you notate? Do you make recordings, or are they just, this is for right now and then it's gone?
Yeah, I think I do a balance of both. When I'm first introducing it, we have lots that are just at the moment enjoyed. However, I do take notes for every lesson. So for instance, last night, a student wrote a song with me. She has this beautiful little singing voice, and she decided to sing me the melody she wanted. And the piece was riveting and called I Want a Puppy, but my mom won't let me.
That's the song that every kid wants, right?
It was very minor and very ominous, and then it went to very high notes. And I thought, I don't have the time to notate all this, but this deserves to be heard. She's 7 years old. It was fabulous. So she said she didn't want to record it, so she wanted me to record it. And believe you me, the note she sang at the end was Amie singing opera by the end, and that isn't my niche. So I recorded that and uploaded that into her Google Classroom. For others, I'll just notate their first little idea, and I'll quickly put it on Noteflight, and we'll just save it, and usually name it a creative name. I've done some the Loose Tooth Blues, or the math homework, my math homework demise, or something. They get dramatic, yeah. Right? And so some of the ideas then I do notate, so we have that little portfolio, and they can stay as little ideas, or we can expand them. Recording is also very valid, and that's the easiest, most accessible to most teachers who are newer to that and feeling overwhelmed. Like, how do you become also great at notating student compositions, which can be very, very time heavy, especially as they get more advanced.
Yes. Let's talk a little about advanced students. You've already given us a ton of ideas, and I think a lot of them can be used for all different levels. But do you have other ideas for improvisation with advanced students?
Yeah, I think some of the intermediate ideas we spoke about really work well for the more advanced students. But something I have had a lot of fun with the advanced students is taking repertoire they already have, and especially if they're students that are working on exam repertoire or, festival pieces or something, then it's harder to fit that creative aspect. So I might take a snippet of something they have and turn it into a different era. Like if they're studying music history and they're like, okay, I'm going to take this, romantic piece and I'm going to make it sound classical. So that's an improvised idea of like, oh, okay, can we add the Alberti bass or can we change it up? So I do lots of that. I also do a lot of chording style with the more advanced students. So if they have a pop song they want to learn, we might say, okay, well, let's look it up. We're going to listen to it together. What ingredients can we find that we already know? Where's the chord pattern? Can we steal from technique that we have all this fabulous technique? How can we make that happen? So with them, it might be that they have the core repertoire, and then on the side, they're learning a pop piece and they're creating their own arrangement for that. And the other thing I do is if we start writing a piece together, then we do just a section each week, like you would touch in on sight reading or you'd do some technical. We would do our improv composition section of our lesson, and it might just be like a 8-minute drop in or a 5-minute drop in to that work so that we can see it progress over time. The other thing I often do is a few weeks before spring break here, we have a 2-week spring break. I sometimes start composition then, and it just gives that inertia so that they already have some ideas by the time spring break comes. And I find that they'll really enjoy that over the break as well. Last year, I also did the noodle challenge with Lila Viss, and she did that every day of a month, 30 days, she had a improv idea, like a creativity prompt, I call them. And so hers were really, really fun and easy to say, play this chord progression and make it sound minor or make it sound sad or turn it into tango, like I said before. So she had great prompts like that were really easy to do with those intermediate advanced and gave them some structure, but allowed them to pace it themselves. So that's something else that I do. I also do a little bit now with sound effects, and that's really effective with a student. If you have a short film clip or you have a photo or something, and you're not trying to do a whole work, you're trying to create sound effects, but with a more grown-up perspective than with the little kids. And so that can also help, is that they're like, oh, what sound? Okay, well, this person on the film is running. How can we make that running sound? Okay, we're in A minor. They're really frightened. And they're just doing little snippets of sound to go with a 3-minute clip or something like that. So again, giving structure to increase creativity sometimes.
Yeah, I feel like that's a really good answer for the next question I was about to ask you, which is, what about maybe students who have transferred in and are at a more advanced level, but have never done any kind of improvisation or anything like this? Or if a teacher is new to this and they want to take some of their advanced students and try this out, I feel like the sound effect thing would be one way. Do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And a reminder for teachers when it's a new concept to either the teacher or the student, it's always so helpful to remember that you don't have to take it all on at once. Sometimes as a teacher who traditionally teaches quite a few students in a week, I'll have one creativity prompt and I'll just do it with all my students at their level. So that's that aspect of like, okay, today we're going to be doing a bit of that film score sound effect, and I'll make it at their level for each and every student. And so that can really help with those transfer students getting wandering with my answer here. How do you get them over their fears? Yeah, I think those ideas are ones that I would do with transfer students and those new. And I also gift them the chance to be a beginner. You're allowed to be a beginner improviser. And I think for teachers too, we sit down and think, oh, well, it has to sound like fancy. And that can really put a barrier there because you're thinking, I have all these amazing works in my fingers. And if I just plunk away with the pedal down and, black keys in different intervals, that's going to sound so elementary. But I find that students and teachers, we actually need that opportunity. Sound like a beginner. And so that's something I would encourage when introducing as a new concept is it doesn't have to sound like your other pieces. Let's play with this concept and let's see if it grows and it sparks some interest. So I'd use a lot of those ideas that we talked about, but just gifting the chance to be a beginner and taking the pressure off it, having to sound good. It doesn't have to sound good at first, or it can sound like a beginner.
Oh, that's so good, Amie. Thank you. I want to hear how you incorporate these ideas with your online students, because I know you're teaching primarily online right now. And it seems like it would be a little bit harder, I would imagine. I don't teach online, but not to be able to, play along, play accompaniments, things like that. So how do you do this online?
Yeah, what a big switch that was to think, okay, well, I can't be like right beside the student playing a duet. The duetting is the thing I miss the most. And the way I've got around that was actually quite fun is now I do a lot of call and response. So for instance, if we're telling a story at the keys and we're doing our black key improv at the beginning lesson, I'll start with my camera down or like this, the side angle. And when my hands disappear, the student gets to add their ideas. And then I respectfully listen. And sometimes they go on for a long time. And I'm thinking, oh, my old self would be like, okay, now we're on to the next thing. But I hold myself back and I think, oh, look at them. They're creating, they're using their fingers. And that's another thing I love about improv is there is no better way to get students like in quote, practicing and playing at the piano more than improvising, because the amount of intellectual capacity it takes and emotional energy to play from a score and be reading notes and to be counting is so many barriers to repeating that many times. Whereas you get a little beginner there with the pedal down, they might play for 20 minutes, random notes at the keys. And they're all the while, their brain's going, oh, we can do this. We're using our fingers. We're using our arms. And I also see that technical aspect of the freedom. And I can watch how they're using their hands and using their bodies with a unique perspective when they're not being micromanaged for their technique in that moment. So when I'm online, lots of call and response, lots of, hey, how about I do this? And you echo it with part of your story. So I woke up and I walked to the beach and the sounds are like really gentle and calm. And then the students might say, but then, a seagull squawked past me. And sometimes we're like, and then I continue the story. So I would say lots of conversational ideas. And then sometimes I'll upload a track if I want them to be able to experience that in real time. Then I can upload something for them. And I also, I find that some of the ideas work very similar, except for the duetting. So really, I do a lot of the same things. I also teach them. Well, no, I think that covers it. I really think I do many of the same things online. I just adopt a call and response sort of communication. And I find that it also teaches that bit of respect and listening right from the start, because they know to watch for me. Like, okay, is she going? Oh, now I have to wait. And so we have this like flow with the lesson that we're not interrupting each other, but we have that mutual respect for waiting. And that's good for me too, because I'm fast paced and I'm like, okay, I got to check off all these objectives in this lesson. But it helps with enjoyment. So yeah, we do those same type of things online as I do in person.
Amie, you've given us so many ideas. I feel like I need to go back and listen to this episode and take notes about all the different ideas you've given us. And the time has flown by, but I do want to shift gears real quickly. Speaking of detours, because I went down a rabbit hole the other night on your YouTube channel. And you have so many fun things on your YouTube channel. And one of those that I found were some videos about Legos, which I told you I have a 7-year-old son. He's obsessed with Legos right now. I would love to know if you incorporate Legos into your piano lessons and how you do so.
Yeah, I absolutely love just everyday objects in music lessons. And I find Lego spans all ages. And I actually got into it more because I was teaching lots of neurodivergent students. And so for one, I use it as regulation, something to do with your fingers, something that's creative. And I find whenever someone has that like regulated calm state, it doesn't waste time. It actually gives you time, because by the time they're like calm, you do something together or they're fidgeting with it, they're more regulated for the other things. I also use it for ear patterns right from the start. So I'll say like, I'm online. So I'll be like, okay, can you go grab like 5 pieces of Lego, like 5 blocks or 5 rectangles or something. So they like dive into the Lego bin. It's there in a snap. They've had a quick, adrenaline boost of running. They're back with that. And then we might start with like, da, 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 standing still. And they put them all in a row. And you can already think, oh, well, that's pre-reading, right? Because they're seeing block, 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 all in the same level, standing still. And then we think, stepping up. And we put the bricks stepping up into the air, da, da, da. And already that's getting their pre-teaching notation on the staff, and also doing it ear so that they're hearing it and trying to replicate it and create it. So I use it for regulation, for ears and patterns. That moves into the note reading aspect, that we can even create melodies with that, and we can assign them notes, or they can be movable patterns that we move. And then I also love it for rhythm and showing rhythm patterns. There's lots of good resources for that online, and some teachers that have done slideshows with it or show you how to divide them into the different rhythms. And then something I've done fun lately is we now have a Lego and music making group class in person. You could also do it effectively online. And that's where we just gather, and I buy one of those like creator kits. And this is your one chance to expense Lego on your business taxes. So if you have a 7-year-old, listen up. And so we buy the new creator kits so they don't have to be specific items. And we put it on a couple big long tables. And the students come, they find a spot, they start creating, and then they take turns as they wish playing the piano in the room as background music.
Wow. I love that. Oh my goodness. We have to raid my son's Lego bin, I think.
Yeah, you'll rate it and then you can add to it. So that one is a total hit now at Motif, and it's one of our most favorite ones because students are at ease and they're using Lego. So there's lots of ways to use Lego, and I love it.
Do you give any guidelines for the creations, or they just go?
Most of the time they just go. This time I did get these cards. I was making them myself, and then I thought somebody's probably already done this, and so I'll have to link this, but it was a set of cards that say things like make a flower or build an enchanted garden. And so they're little cue cards. So I laminated this with my own 7-year-old, and I had these on the table. So if a student prefers linear instruction or an idea, they had something to go with, and if they want to just free build. And we also invite the families to join. So there was lots of grown-ups and grandparents at the tables creating as well.
Oh, how fun. All right, Amie, can you share anything else from your YouTube channel that maybe you want to direct listeners to? There's all sorts of different things. Do you have any favorites?
Yeah, I often highlight music of contemporary creatives. And so those are a dominant presence there. But on the topic of improvising and that playful approach, listeners here might enjoy one called Ode to Scorpion, the Sandwing Princess. And that was built off of the Wings of Fire series and a student who has had an enthusiasm for that. So she wrote an improvised piece with me with different aspects. And actually, on the pianocreativity.com website, it's fabulous. They highlighted that video there, and there's some fabulous resources from many composers on that site worth taking a look at. Another video is Steal These 4 Notes from Pumpkin Boogie. So I use the bass line of Pumpkin Boogie, and then students can go crazy with the blues scale with that. And then another one that's that creative outside the box thinking that teachers often appreciate is I have a video up there that celebrate music without a recital. So when students are too anxious or they're not going to play in a recital, ideas for really celebrating their progress, even if they won't perform in a recital or it's a not yet. So that's sometimes helpful if you're working with some outside the box learners. You might have some that present that.
I love that. I'm going to check that one out. Amie, what creative things are bringing you joy right now?
That's always such a nice question. I definitely have the capacity for hyperfocus, which means music is always something that's like top of mind, that I get like a small moment and I'm back in my closet making music. But I have been trying to branch out. So I got a 1,000-piece puzzle that's now on the table. So I'm doing puzzles. I've always been a big reader. I'm reading Fish in a Tree right now, which is fabulous for educators about students learning differently. And I also have 3 busy boys. And so hilariously, you can often find me at the skateboard park, which I do stick on rollerblades and I do ice skating. So those are kind of like fun extras. But I must admit, music has been very, very central in my passion and enjoyment of creativity.
Well, Amie, I appreciate you sharing all of your ideas and your beautiful, joyful spirit with us. This has been such a fun interview. I really loved getting to know you. If listeners want to get in touch or find more of your resources, where can they go?
Yeah, if they want to hop over to YouTube, our YouTube channel is Motif Music Studios there on YouTube. And so there's lots of uploads for creative teaching ideas and for adding the music of contemporary composers to your music library. And I also do have a website that's more specific to student and teaching at motifmusicstudios.com. But there's certainly a contact form if anyone's like, oh, I want to brainstorm. Then I love brainstorming on the behalf of teachers.
Great. And Motif is MOTIF. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. And It is plural, like Motif Music Studios with the S.
Okay, good. And we'll put all these links in the show notes. Amie, it was so nice chatting with you today. Thank you for taking time to share with us.
Yeah, it was an absolute delight. And I hope it'll give everyone just that launch into more creative teaching alongside students.
Thank you, Amie. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Amie. She gave so many practical tips and ideas, and I encourage you to check out the show notes to get the resources that we talked about. In case you missed it on the Topcast, I recently interviewed Tim Topham to celebrate the 400th episode of his show, and it was so much fun. I learned a number of things about Tim that I didn't know, and I think you will too. So head over to the Topcast and check out that episode. That's the end of the show for this week. I'm Rachel Ehring, and you've been listening to the Top Music Piano Podcast. I will talk with you again very soon.
How do you keep up to date with all the latest trends and research into music education? How do you connect with other teachers around the world and make sure your teaching stays fresh and relevant for students of all ages and stages, both now and into the future? I created our Top Music Pro membership to be the one-stop shop for music teaching resources, training, support and community, and I'd love for you to come and join us inside. With over 40 comprehensive training courses, hundreds of teaching demonstrations and lesson plans, free monthly sheet music, discounts, and all the business and pedagogy support you could ever need, Top Music Pro is the community you've been looking for. If you're ready to level up your learning from the podcast and join thousands of other teachers in our global network, head over to topmusicpro.com today.